Marina, I have a question for you. There was a researcher that I worked with named Dr. Margot Chandley, and she did a fascinating doctoral dissertation about the correlation between people who had had unpleasant alien abduction experiences, people who had been um, had implants or had been become hybrid mothers on interdimensional planes, and that in their human lives, they quite often, a very high percentage of them, had a history of being molested or sexually abused as children. And it was a really fascinating study. And her point, because a pop psychologist could say, okay, well, there are no aliens, it's just transference. But Margot's point of view was that it wasn't transference, it was that because they had already experienced losing their power as a child, the feeling of helplessness, they were vulnerable to aliens that had a more scientific lab, treating us like lab rats agenda. Um, and so it was a really fascinating thing. And I did my interview with her 25 years ago, and she since has passed away. But I'm curious um, how you relate to that. Not
I just,
necessarily that you had that childhood experience, but if you've experienced that there is a correlation between people in their human experience being losing their power as children and then being more vulnerable to alien, unwanted or unpleasant or uncomfortable alien experiences.
I just want to jump in because there's also a study by Kenneth Ring in a book called The Omega Project, where he says people who've been traumatized when they were younger are more open to
Mm-hmm.
alien contact because there's kind of been a wall about the solidity of reality that's been broken down. So it's similar to what this woman Margot's saying. So
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. And I'm a big fan of Dr. Ring. I've interviewed him
yes,
before too.
yes.
Marina, what do you
So
think?
Well, my point of view, my specific point of view about this, it's that first of all, if you are taken to be experimented on by extraterrestrials, it is a clear sign that you have a special lineage that is more of an extraterrestrial nature than human nature. Not necessarily, but generally that's the rule. So when people make that connection that there is a lot of beings that have experienced these and being molested as a child, and then also being taken by extraterrestrials and being also molested in a sense, or abused eventually, how do I connect those two concepts or events? It's because it's when it comes to lineage. you know we have extraterrestrial lineages have a lot of history when it comes to karmic, let's say, um, karmic energies, karmic soul contracts with lower aspects of the shallow consciousness. So, for instances, that's why in certain families, like the elite bloodlines, for example, or generational abuse, bloodlines, all these beings, they have a tendency to have been abused in their childhood or to have difficult childhoods, because there's always, when there's a lot of an extraterrestrial DNA, there's a lot of consciousness. And as we are in third density, because we are in a polarized dimension, in a polarized density, that much consciousness, it's translated in polarity. So we are more keen to have extreme, expressions of the other side of um, the equilibrium of light versus dark, you know, so that we can create a space to bring that consciousness here on Earth, which is not necessarily something that we come as, it's not necessarily like a planned thing. It's a natural effect of how consciousness, when it descends to a plane that is polarized, naturally polarized, because it's the third density, it expresses itself like that. So, for instance, a person that comes here with a lot of connection with the inner child, you know, with a lot of knowledge on spirit, you know, if that DNA becomes, if that DNA disintegrates its aspects, you know, and polarizes itself, descends to the lower densities, there's a lot of karmic energies in there. There's a lot of, you know, imbalances and extreme opposites, you know. So many times that will make it so that there is a history of connection to the lower astral, you know, lower aspects of one's consciousness, because there's more ability to explore, because there's more connection to higher density as the material, the genetic material comes from extraterrestrial beings from higher densities. There is more dimensional depth at every time. So because of that combination of higher, bigger dimensional depth to the experience of consciousness, to the experience of exploration of consciousness, there tends to be more exploration of polarity itself down here. So many times this, you know, lineages will be the most vulnerable to manifesting these kinds of abuse, you know.